right. Well, welcome, folks. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat, feel free to add in your name, organization, and favorite food. We're going to go ahead and get started. Let you know right away that we are recording today. A few folks had requested that we send out a recording to them. So we will be recording and sending this out. I also just like to always make a quick land acknowledgement. So I do like to remember that we are on the traditional lands of the Clackamas, Santiam, and other Kalapuya tribes here in this area, and that the original stewards of this land did in many cases have it stolen from them. So just like to bring that into the space whenever we get started. We're talking about gender today. So thank you all for being here. I have Kaya as my lovely co-host today. Kaya, did you want to say anything as we get started?
Just hello, I'm Kaya. I use they and she pronouns, a mix of them, and I work at Metropolitan Family Service, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome, thank you. And the reason I asked Kaya if they would join us is because the question we're going to go over today is one that a lot of us have raised over the years. Most recently, Kaya was asking about it. So that's why we asked him to come co-host. And hopefully we're going to have a good discussion today. Basically, what the agenda is that I'm going to share a slideshow. I'm going to go through about 5 to 8 minute training, really quick. And then we're going to open it up for questions and to kind of hear from y'all about where you're standing on this. So I'm not sure if this will take up the whole hour or not, just really wanted to make sure there was space for us to think and talk about this very important question. So I'll go ahead and share my screen now and get this going. All right. So I want to get started here. Can folks see my screen? See a pretty unicorn up there? Okay. So I like to get started when I talk about gender by just kind of mentioning this gender unicorn. So I'll probably throw around quite a few words today, and some of them may be familiar to you or some of them may not. I want to point out that the words that I'm using may be about gender identity or gender expression. I'm not talking about who people are attracted to today. So just to kind of make that clarification right up front, we're talking about gender, which is different from biological sex in some cases, and also which is different from who you're attracted to. So I just kind of want to point out that this is all along a spectrum, and that folks have many different identities within this, and that we are going to be using a range of language here. I called this presentation the gender question changing on the IDA application and in real life, because I really think that it's important that we recognize that our whole program exists within a lot of other systems and examples of different ways where we're being oppressed and holding power. So what we are talking about today is the fact that we are going to change the options listed on the VITA application for gender. So why are we changing it? The main reason we're changing it is in the name of inclusivity. We want people to be able to express themselves as they are. This goal is that we want our community to feel seen. We want the various communities we work with to know that we see them as whole people. This is definitely part of the diversity work that we're doing. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, well, it starts with race, also includes all other group's power dynamics as well. So what we are really hoping to do here is to, one, make it clear to folks who are filling out our application that we do want them to be their whole selves and we want to hear about who they really are. And two, because we want to recognize that we are in a world that is moving forward and we want our program to move forward with it. So those are kind of our main underlying whys. How did we come to these new options? I have quote new in quotes because they're just different options than we had before. It came out first when several different people over the years have mentioned that the options we have on the current application are just a little limiting. So we heard this from lots of different people. And as I mentioned, most recently, Kaya reached out and said, hey, is there a way we could get more of these options on here? And I said, I think a lot of this had to do with the federal program, right? We used to have a federal program with federal funding that was very, I'd say, explicit in what data categories it allowed. Now we have more flexibility around that. So once it was brought up, we did some research. We looked at what other organizations are doing, read a bunch of articles. I hope folks got a chance to look through some of the articles we posted into that calendar invite. And we reached out to neighborhood partnerships and said, hey, would you be willing to consider this with us? Maybe we can make this change. And so it really was a process of advocating for ourselves and our clients, doing some research, and then coming together to really make it work out. So our old options, the options we have always had on the IDA application in Oregon are participants' gender is the question, and the possible answers are female, male, decline to ID. One of the issues with this is that these terms do refer to sex rather than gender. So just kind of wanted to throw that out there, that we are looking for gender here. So that's part of it. Our new terms, starting in the beginning of our new funding year, so April 2021, same question, participants' gender. The new options to answer are woman, man, non-binary, two-spirit, prefer not to say, prefer to fill in. And it is multi-select, which I think is important to point out. We're allowing folks to select all the options that apply to them. So that's my presentation. I really wasn't kidding about the 5 to 8 minutes. I really just wanted to give some little bit of background and some kind of food for thought. And then I was really hoping to hear from all of y'all. Kaya, I'm just going to throw you out on the spot now, but is there anything that you wanted to say or any kind of anywhere you'd like to start the discussion, anything like that?
Yeah, first, I'm just like so grateful that you were so responsive to making this change. And yeah, it was really cool to see how quickly it happened. I know that there is a lot of different language, and many people maybe are hearing some terms for the first time or still learning new terms. So I think asking questions in settings like this is really important. I will say, I think inclusion goes beyond intake forms. And so this is to make sure, you're checking with a client about what pronouns they prefer and then actually using them, because one of the quickest ways to lose trust is if someone says, I use she, her pronouns, and then you use the wrong set of pronouns for them, or something like that. And I think also just to emphasize that this work is important to do with clients. It's also important to notice our colleagues' pronouns and identities and respect those as well. and just like make sure that people, when they do decide to share a part of their identity with you, that they feel safe and seen doing so. Yeah.
Thanks for that. I really appreciate that perspective. And I think it is, for me, it's one of these things that is a small thing that we can do that may have a big impact on even one saver. So that's kind of where this is coming from. Here are some questions that I kind of posted up here. What questions do y'all have? How does this make you feel? Anything else we need to consider? I might stop sharing the screen and just kind of let us, see each other. Okay. Randy has already posted in the chat. He's not a first-time caller or listener. Randy, 2 questions. 1, will we explicitly use gender, or will there be 2 questions, sex and gender? And 2, what would be the plan if Affy was resurrected? So great questions, Randy. Before I answer these, I'm going to let you all know that feel free to put your name in the chat if you want to queue for a question, or feel free to put your question in the chat. Either of those is great. So Randy, to your questions. 1, we did discuss this and decided we only need gender. So there's no reason that sex is pertinent to this program, so we're not collecting it. Excellent question. 2nd, what if Affy were resurrected? Basically, we would take the data that we've collected and tie it back to the categories they have listed. Amy, I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but if you would, do you have any comment on what we would do if Affy were resurrected, or how we would tie this back to Affy?
Well, I think hopefully Affy might have like different categories too that would make it easier to.
I can't hear you, Amy.
Okay, I'm sorry, you might have to come back to me. How about now?
No. Sorry. Maybe I can throw Luke on. Affy is the Assets for Independence. It is the federal IDA program that was ended in 2017. Luke, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I'll try and answer for Amy. I think we, like you said, we would just roll it into the categories that are included in Affy, and so things might roll into the other category, or decline to ID, whatever ways that they would fit. I don't think we're gonna plan around Affy coming back in the same way that it was. So I know there was talk of Affy coming back as a different like under a different name a year ago or so. I haven't heard anything else, but will come back that it was before. I think it would come back as a new and different program, hopefully. But again, no reason to plan around it coming back at this point.
Thanks, Luke. And yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking, is that most likely if it does come back, it would be a different program. I think it's pretty unlikely that the previous Affy will actually return. Excellent question, though. Rogan, I have you in the queue.
Hey, everybody. Also really glad to see this conversation happening. I have a question for if a client wants to change the gender that they indicated on their form and or their name. What process would we go through for that? Would we just email CASA? Maybe like change it to a different asset or things like that. So I just want to make sure that like we only have to do this once. There's not like paperwork and gaps missed. So checking on the process.
That's a great question. A couple of things I'll say. One, if an applicant ever wants to change what gender we have listed, that would be as easy as an email to IDA, to the IDA team. The second thing I would say is that if it's a legal name change, we do require some kind of documentation, and the bank will also require that same documentation.
Okay.
We do have a field on our application, and in Outcome Tracker now that does allow for a preferred name.
Oh, okay, great.
So that's definitely an option as well. If someone doesn't have a legal name change, but just wants us to use a different name, just let us know. The one we're still kind of working on is the pronoun. How do we make the pronoun field fit in all the different systems that we do? So that's kind of just another one we're working on right now. Traditionally, we've just used gender neutral pronouns, and we're just looking at whether we want to change that or not. So good question for sure. But yeah, other than a legal name change, it would just be as simple as emailing us.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Thank you. Mark asked if there had been any talk of resurrecting AFI. Yeah, I don't think actually it's ever been talked about being brought back. It was always just this new program that Merkley is talking about maybe creating.
Yeah, and totally off topic. Also, I just was like, what?
Well, whatever. We have space. We have each other here to talk to. It's all good. What other questions do people have? What other things would you all want to talk about?
I can step in and just acknowledge that Two-Spirit is an identity specifically for folks who have a tribe or identify as Native American. And for people who feel that that expresses them, but maybe they don't have a tribe, I'm really happy that you have the write-in and other section, because we just are so, language is not keeping up with gender. And so just putting it out there for folks who maybe see something written in that they don't know about or haven't heard before, just to keep that in mind. It's a friendly reminder.
Thanks, Rogan. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that brings up a good point, which is that as we're doing research for this, we could have listed 40 different genders. Easily. We could have done the first whole page of the intake of just genders, right? And so I do think it's important to have that fill in just for folks who, are like, where am I on this? I'm still not represented. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that. And we did kind of decide to add Two-Spirit intentionally based on the fact that there are a fair amount of Native folks in our programs. So thanks for mentioning that as well. Does anybody want to talk about how it makes them feel? Anybody have any feelings? We're here for that. We're doing feelings. Elma, how do you feel?
Well, recently my granddaughter, she's 12, and she brought this to my attention. So I like it. It's something I can bring back to her and share with her. So it's nice. I like it.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great point too, is that this is one of those situations where the youth is teaching us, right?
Yeah.
I have, so many people around my age group are the gender non-conforming elders at this point, and we're just looking at the younger folks being like, oh my gosh, look at all these things you're doing with gender that we never could have even imagined. This is so fun. So I definitely appreciate hearing that from your 12-year-old granddaughter too.
Yeah.
New to some folks in the room. Yeah, and that's kind of the main reason we wanted to talk about this, is that it might be new for a lot of us, right? I mean, I think even when we added the third decline to ID option, that there was, controversy around that it's a shift in culture. So I just really want to, make sure that folks know that we realize that. And the other thing I wanted to just make sure I mentioned is that we will have expanded options on the Spanish application as well. I was just listening to the Gender Reveal podcast. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that one. It's a really good podcast. And they were talking to someone who is a Chicano trans person. And so hearing him talk about the Chicanx and Chicano and Latinx and Latino categories and how he perceives himself in those was really interesting to me. So I just want to kind of throw out there that thanks for putting that in the chat, Kaya, that we do plan to translate this to Spanish as well. What other questions?
Yeah, if CASA actually came up with some training, because I also have a teenager and have learned an unbelievable amount, but there's a lot of language which is now considered offensive, or there are things that we should and shouldn't do. And I honestly don't always know what those things are. I find myself defaulting to they, them for most of my children's friends because at least 50%, not joking, that's not an exaggeration, of the children in my daughter's class are identifying as gender fluid or non-binary, and it's hard to keep track of it all, and I stick my foot in my mouth regularly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not simple. There's no simple answer. Kaya, I saw that you unmuted. You want to say something?
Yeah, I could jump in as well. First, I really appreciated, Elma, your point, because I recently talked with my grandma, and a reoccurring theme is that she doesn't believe in they, them pronouns. And should use other pronouns. And so I just want to acknowledge that, yeah, for a lot of people, these pronouns aren't super familiar, or there might still be questions. And Suzanne, to your point, I think just mirroring whatever language people are using for themselves is important. For example, words like transsexual generally are not words that we use in the US. However, in other countries, people do identify as transsexual. And that's still a commonly used word and doesn't have negative connotations when those people use it. So I think just being really attentive to what people are using to self-identify is important. And I think defaulting to they, them until you know someone's pronouns is a great option. And then once they tell you, certainly trying to first meet them, great way to go.
I think there are also some slang terms that people within the community might use that are not okay for people in the community to use. Might learn that the hard way too. Like if you watch RuPaul's Drag Race and you think that that's the language you can use, you cannot use that language all the time.
And I would say that this is similar to other identities, right? Whether that's race or class or gender, that sometimes we can say things about ourselves that we're not okay with somebody else using that same language. I mean, for me, there's the bitch word, right? I do not like it when people use that word, but I might use that word. And I think that that's a pretty good example of how it does vary from one group to another. And I think a couple things. I mean, one, I think the more space and time we can create to talk about it and to feel comfortable talking about it and to say, I don't know, please help me understand, that's really helpful and healthy. And also just going back to and mirroring what Kaya said about how people speak about themselves. Part of the reason we ask pronouns is so that people start to feel more comfortable just introducing themselves, saying, hi, I'm Lane, I use she, her, and they, them pronouns. That's part of my introduction now, right? And, there are some spaces I go into where people are very comfortable with that. And there are some spaces I go into where people are very uncomfortable with that, right? And that's going to happen as things are changing, right? We have to be able to listen to each other and really hear what it is that folks are asking for. And I think it's tough because what we're shifting from assuming a lot to really needing people to tell us about themselves. And that's a huge shift, right? There's nothing, I don't know, simple about that, but it's fun. It's exciting.
I wanted to jump in and say I saw that Tara said in the chat that the distinction between preferred pronouns and pronouns, and for anyone who's curious about that, the reasoning there is that so often people ask, for people to share their preferred pronouns at meetings and things. The move away from that is because a pronoun is just something you use, just like your name. Like you wouldn't say that Kaya is my preferred name. It's just my name. And if you are using a different name for me, if you call me Sam, it's like, why are you doing that? Kaya is just my name. So kind of the same goes for pronouns. If I say that I use they, them, or she, her, whatever pronouns, those are just my pronouns. And some people have strong feelings about what pronouns they use. Some people are still picking pronouns because it might be a complicated subject for them. But I think a good approach is to share your own pronouns, not just in specific conversations about equity, but to normalize sharing your pronouns when you're meeting with management, when you're meeting with anyone for the first time. And when you share your pronouns, particularly if you're sharing your pronouns as a cis person, so someone who identifies with the sex that you were assigned at birth, that creates space for other people to see that they are also welcome to bring whatever identities they have into the room.
Thanks for contributing that, Kaya. I think that that's really important and valuable, and it's part of seeing people as their whole selves, right? It's not that I would prefer that you call me Lane, it's that that's my name. So I think that's a really important part of this conversation as well. What other things are folks thinking about? Are there other things?
So
Sorry, go ahead.
for old people like me, it's not always easy to get your brain around changing people's pronouns from one to another. So especially if somebody has changed from one to another, that can get really confusing. And then it gets even more confusing when you have somebody that goes sort of, well, today I'm he, him, tomorrow I'm they, them, tomorrow, the day after that I'm she, her. And what I found is I can't get defensive. If I mess up, I just messed up. And okay, I'll do my best to do my best. So, but it can get really confusing.
Yeah, and I have, I have people in my life who say they will use all pronouns. I have people in my life who say they will not use pronouns. They just want to be called by their name. So I think that what that's a good reminder of is something that I hear from my trans friends pretty regularly, and that I also feel as a gender nonconforming person, is that it's a small transgression, and if you make it into a whole thing, then I'm taking care of your emotional needs and making sure that you feel okay about this mistake you made. Whereas if you can just say, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that, and just keep moving on with the conversation, acknowledge that you made a mistake, move on, that it's really, and that's true with language in general. I feel like that if somebody corrects you, it's so much more valuable, and there's so much more space to be had in saying, oh, whoops, I will work on that and moving on, because it's not about you, right? And that's another hard part about this, is that we have to figure out ways to not take this personally, whatever this is. So what I was going to ask, is there other considerations? Are there other things we should be thinking about and talking about in this space that we haven't yet? Randy has a question. Go ahead, Randy.
Translate into like demographic reports, and why not just be fill in the blank?
Good question. And Amy could maybe speak to that because she is the data person. The truth is that there's a lot of value in being able to collect and recognize patterns. So if we do just write in, then if somebody spells woman with an I instead of an E, do they get their own category? Or if somebody spells man with an X instead of an A, do they get their own category? It just makes the whole question of how do we characterize this person, because we still do data, we still love to track this stuff. Amy, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Can you guys hear? I'm so sorry. I downloaded an update last week and my audio settings, so I'm sorry. The question was, how will that be represented in reports? And so we will have a little bit of a transition period where it might be a little messy, but I think, yeah, we will, for the initiative wide, we'll start using these new options or reports and just trying to represent, you know, what people are telling us using these expanded options. And yeah, we're trying to make a balance between having some additional, more inclusive options, also giving people the space to fill that in so we can be looking at that, but also have some ability to try to summarize the data for reporting purposes. So I don't know if there's a specific question about how, you know, concerns about what might happen in the reports. I'm happy to speak to that too, but.
Randy, does that answer what you're looking for?
Yeah, I just was more or less curious is like how we'll be able to work in, you know, so when these reports, like we look at those reports as ways to go, okay, where do we need to put our services? And so that's essentially what I was concerned about is, you know, are we limiting ourselves with 4 categories? Should it just be open-ended? Like, how does that all translate into being able to, I guess, reach those areas that we really want to reach?
And honestly, this gets into some questions that I find fascinating, but maybe not everybody does, around data and how data is collected and used and analyzed. Because for any question, I mean, the first one that comes to mind is race or ethnicity. Why don't we have a fill-in for that? Why don't we have a fill-in for, you know, we do have a fill-in for a country of origin. You know, so it's a good question, right? Like we could have a fill-in for everything, but then the data is a little bit less clear and it's a little bit less easy to sort of report out on it. So I think that, you know, it's definitely a good question and that's one I think about a lot, but I also think that, you know, for this situation, what we got to was really, let's give some of the big categories that we know folks fit into and also leave space. And I think that that's, you know, maybe overall a pretty good data practice for the moment, just because there are so many mainstream cultural institutions that require us to report and to have this data. And this is definitely something we talked about with neighborhood partnerships as well, is just kind of this idea of should it just be write-in, but we decided there was some value to being able to collect some categories and have a bit of a, you know, chart or whatnot made from that.
Thank you for answering.
Of course.
I have a question, Lee.
All right. Yeah, Elna.
Will IDs have to match the pronoun?
That's a great question. We don't care what the ID says. People are welcome to pick whatever gender they want on the application. We don't coordinate it back in any way, so. But that is important in remembering the legal name versus preferred name thing that might come up. Is just always remember that if somebody tells you they want to use a different name than what's on their ID, you can just tell us like this is the preferred name.
Okay.
We won't change it in our system. We'll just add it onto the preferred line. Good question. All right, well, I'm not going to make you guys sit here all day. I'll let you go. I just wanted to see all your friendly faces one more time before my leave. Thank you for starting that GoFundMe. That was really above and beyond and more than I ever could have imagined that y'all would do. So that was really, really sweet of you guys.
You take care and be safe, Lane.
Thank you. I will try. Yeah, I'm glad we got to talk about this topic as well, Suzanne. And yeah, I'm just glad that I get to be in community with all of you and that you're willing to have this conversation. I know, I don't know how to turn it off. Okay.
You're not frozen anymore.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you all. Thank you for letting us have this conversation, for being open to it, for all the work you do in your communities, and for everything that you bring. Y'all are the best.
Bye.
Bye, friends. Take care of yourselves.